Hey everybody, how's it going? I just wanted to let you know that this podcast, where we talk a lot about Kobold Press, is brought to you by Kobold Press. Want to learn the secrets of elven magic, blast your enemies with battle magic, or build cunning mechanical servants with clockwork magic? Of course you do. Of course you do. That's why Deep Magic from Kobold Press has all this and more for 5th edition. Time magic, rune magic, illumination, nearly 20 PDFs with new ones coming out all the time. In this series, you'll find new magical schools, sorceress origins, warlock patrons, feats, spells, magic items, and so much more. Pick up the Deep Magic series for 5th edition at koboldpress.com. That's koboldpress.com. Where you can pick up all of the awesome and very thrifty PDFs. They are super cheap. Get a lot of awesome, play-tested, incredible content with art. Bang for your buck. Go check it out. Deep Magic series for 5th edition at koboldpress.com. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with two of the world's greatest tabletop game designers. I'm talking with Wolfgang Baur of Kobold Press and Dan Dillon, who worked for Kobold Press for a long time on a lot of different supplements, and now he's working full-time at Wizards of the Coast. He was not at the time we recorded this interview, but Dan, so proud of you. So freaking cool and awesome. This is an incredible interview about Courts of the Shadow Fey and how to write an awesome modular adventure from the folks over at Kobold Press. So you are definitely going to want to check out this interview with them. Always giving game design tidbits that blow my mind. So here is my interview with Dan and Wolfgang. Okay, everybody, now I am here with two of my favorite game designers and human beings on the planet, Wolfgang and Dan. Welcome back to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, and they should, Wolfgang, who are you and what do you do in the tabletop role-playing game industry?
Sure. Well, I'm a game designer, but mostly a publisher at Kobold Press these days. So I try to get together big books of monsters and adventures, and I get to work with all the cool creative people around the tabletop field.
That is a succinct way of saying RPG God. Yes, absolutely.
A very small and minor god.
A demigod, if you will.
Oh, hey, there, yeah. And then we get to bring in heroes, right? Like Dan?
That's right. Oh. Dan is a champion. A Kobold champion.
Kobold champion.
Ooh, I like that.
Who are you and what do you do in role-playing games, Dan?
Well, I'm Dan Dillon. I'm a freelance game designer. I get to write for cool big books of monsters and adventures. I do a lot of work for Kobold Press and a little bit for Wizards of the Coast and a bunch of other third-party publishers out there.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you both here, especially because we're talking about something you both worked on from Kobold Press. We're talking about Shadow Fey, right? Specifically, yes. Sort of the Courts of the Shadow Fey. So there is a big adventure that came out from Kobold Press that you all worked on, and we're definitely going to talk about that. I'm super excited. I think it's awesome. It's got a lot of great options that can be either used as is or mined for other adventures, which I think is great. But let's talk about Shadow Fey in particular. For people who may not be familiar with the idea of Shadow Fey or Midgard, what are Shadow Fey?
Well, I can go back to the dawn of time with this thing. Because they came along super early in the history of Kobold Press. There was a little adventure called Castle Shadowcrag that we did like in 2008, 2010. And there we said, we need some shadowy elfy creatures. They weren't even the big villains of the piece. But we said, let's get these guys in there. And everybody kind of loved them. And they started showing up in other places, like in the Free City of Zobek. Then they started showing up in other adventures. They became a playable race. And then Courts of the Shadow Fey for 4th edition D&D was where they starred for the first time. And yeah, fourth edition, man, I loved it. I was, this is the campaign I ran as my first fourth edition outing. And it was we started mid-level. But that's where they come from. They're creatures of the Shadow Plane. They're corrupted elves, if you like. And they live in sort of a parallel world beside the mortal world. And they come and visit people in the mortal world, but they have their own plans, their own magic, their own mastery of illusion, and pretty much they're total snobs. They think it's my favorite part about the Shadow Fays, right? They are stuck up beyond belief. They're the best. Everyone else kind of sucks and should be paying them tribute and should just acknowledge how awesome they are. So they're very susceptible to flattery, but they're also going to tell you that you are a toad, a turd, a wart, a pimple of impertinence. Playing them as NPCs makes me so happy because players hate their guts. Because I don't know. Dan, you wrote them up for 5th edition as a playable race, and
I did. They were super fun to work on. They're an interesting challenge because, well, they're elves. First of all, when you get right down to it, they're a subrace of elf, is how they're presented in 5th edition, but a lot of their story talks about how there's so much kind of more than an elf now. They've made pacts with darkness. They used to be elves. They, rather than falling into decline with the rest of the elven empires in Midgard, they slipped into shadow and cut some deals with some nasty, nasty beings, the Queen of Night and Magic. And now they're this interesting blend sort of elf and fairy and goblin. And so it's fun to try and capture those elements and portray them in playable traits. So they're pretty cool. They love slipping around in the dark places between the worlds. They can teleport a few times through darkness and shadow. So they have a lot of fun utility, but then all of that story is baked into them as well. And so they're very charismatic. So they're the kind of ones that you hate to love and love to hate. As Wolfgang was saying, they are super arrogant.
And the worst part of their super arrogance, of course, is that it's slightly justified, right?
Yeah.
They actually are good at a lot of stuff that other people aren't, and they have special magic, and they have special weapons, and they have a whole society that is a thriving elvish society when the Midgard elves are totally in retreat. So they kick a lot of ass and are not afraid to brag about it.
And they have a lot of pull, a lot of clout throughout history that one of the things that happens in the courts of the Shadow Fey is just for whatever reason, they haven't been pressing their claim or pulling their strings that they have. And then in the courts of the Shadow Fey, they start doing that again. And it comes just completely out of nowhere, right? And the people in the city of Zobek.
And it's sort of deliberate, right? It's like, we're so awesome and so big that we can forget about owning this city for has it been 100 years?
Yeah.
Somebody go press our claim, go get us some tribute. We should be in charge there, right? Like, it's not even the highest, it's not their number one priority. It's just like, oh, right, we own that thing.
We should probably go collect those taxes and make sure everyone that lives there knows that they're living and dying under our rule, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yes. So somebody go handle that. Yeah.
And of course, the person that goes to handle it is totally capable of doing it. But from the human perspective, it's, oh my goodness, what is going on? Who are they? Is this legit? How can they be doing this? And things go to pieces pretty rapidly. That's just chapter 1.
Things go to pieces with the Shadow Fey. They're a playable race for 5th edition, which I think is really cool because a lot of what you're talking about, it can be fun to be arrogant and have a story reason for that to be and everything. What is this new adventure that you've come out with? What is that all about?
Oh, well, the joy of the Courts of the Shadow Fey is that it's been reworked twice, right? It's like a finely tuned machine for taking mid to high level players and putting them in a fish out of water situation, which is, there's plenty of combat, but the way you win in this adventure is by navigating the courts and manipulating some of the politics and showing up at the right moment with the right gift. So My joy in it is you show up, it's a mysterious castle. You have to enter the plane of shadow. You have to talk to the Queen of Night and Magic. But starting out, the Queen of Night and Magic doesn't know who you are and doesn't care to see you. And it's her shadow plane. If she doesn't want to see you, you don't see her, right?
Quite literally.
So that sort of kick the door down approach just doesn't work. And I don't know. I ran it first and fourth edition. We redid it for Pathfinder, and now we've redone it for fifth edition. I think every time through, we've gotten smarter about how does the plot work, what are the DM aids, how do the challenges resolve, which are the crucial NPCs, how much combat should there be. I don't know. I've always believed in organic design, like all the great first edition adventures that we remember from the Gygax days or that have been redone. They all got played to death in the AD&D Open, and they got rewritten 6 times. And this feels kind of like that, in that we've honed it. And for 5th edition, Dan did a lot of the honing, and so did Kim Mohan, the editor. So I don't know, Dan, you want to talk about like what changed partly?
Sure. So in my first pass through, I didn't change a whole lot structurally. There was an awful lot of details that had to get sanded and filed and kind of make everything fit together just a little bit better. So the major set pieces are all going to be the same. So if you played Courts of the Shadow Fey from, you know, the Pathfinder or 4th edition days, you're going to recognize pretty much everything that you're seeing. One of the things that I am excited about is there are a few secrets and tidbits that got added that were not there before, that are some pretty hefty world building details for Greater Midgard that are just sort of hidden here and there in the module, and maybe you'll find them, maybe you won't, but they could have some pretty significant consequences if you do discover them. So that's a lot of fun. And then reworking things to bring it up to date with what we've done in the world book for the Shadow Realm. Like there are bearfolk ambassadors at the Courts of the Shadow Fey from the nation.
There were no bearfolk in 4th edition.
Yeah, there were no bearfolk. I think I put I'm trying to remember. I think I put in a Twilight Ghoul ambassador or two as well, from the Shadow Ghoul sort of splinter empire that broke off from the empire of the ghouls below Midgard and sort of fled into the darkness because someone tried to overthrow the emperor of the ghouls with a coup, and that did not go well. So they fled into the deep dark tunnels and found themselves stumbling into Shadow, and so now they live in the Shadow Realm and they're eking out an existence there. So there's a few of them spooking around, and there are some
lords still there.
Yep. There's still a demon lord hanging out in the well. Yep.
I mean, we talk about it as Courts of the Shadow Fey, but the thing is, it's a nexus of power and politics. And so everybody who wants to be a player is there, right? Like the bearfolk are there, the ghouls are there, a demon lord is there. It's not like you spend your entire adventure hanging out with snooty elves. There's plenty of other challenges around. And all of those people, of course, are trying to move their agendas and make sure that they get the opportunity to steer things their way. So, yeah, there's nothing like having to politic with some ambassador of hell.
Definitely. Well, and so one of the things I think is interesting, Dan, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the adventure sort of structurally. It doesn't necessarily play like a linear thing, right? The players seem to have a lot of freedom in the adventure.
Yeah, particularly once you get to the court, it's a little bit, going from the court, from Zobek to the court is a little bit of a path, since, well, you're quite literally on a path. You're following a shadow road, and so there's some suggested encounters, and of course, the DM is free to shake those up and switch them around and all that.
We made them scalable for 5th edition. Those encounters can be. So there's a wider range of levels. If you start a little lower, you get a few more encounters and level up. And if you're already high level, those encounters on the Shadow Road, a couple of them are fairly brutal for the scaled up version.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah, and there's some new monsters in there, some things that you're not going to find in the Tome of Beasts or the Creature Codex. So there's some fun stuff spooking around on the way to the courts. And then when you get to the court, it just becomes this series of crazy hoops that you have to jump through. First, like Wolfgang was talking about, to even get the Shadow Fey to notice you. Because when you show up, you are very literally beneath their notice. They don't know you're there. They don't care that you're there. And you have to do something to get their attention for them to even acknowledge you on their plane of existence. And so once that happens, then some doors start to open for you, and you have to figure out, all right, we need to talk to the frickin' queen of this whole plane. How do we make that happen? And so there's a whole kind of a pretty well-bounded sandbox of things that you can do to make yourselves important enough to get an invitation to see the queen. And so there's a various different ways you can approach it. There's a bunch of different NPCs with things that they want, and they have the clout to kind of help you climb the social ladder. If you want some combat, there are rivals that can be destroyed. There are duels that can be fought on the arcing dueling bridge section of the wall that's over 1,000-foot cliff, where the loser, the bridge very suddenly becomes insubstantial shadow for them and they fall. There's some pretty fun stuff going on there. So there's a little bit of a more if you want to run your duels like a combat, just kind of one-on-one, roll initiative, blow by blow, hit point by hit point, you can do that. If you don't, we give you some guidelines on how you can more quickly and a little bit more almost mini game abstract it out with opposing checks and different tricks you can pull, that sort of thing. So we give you some example for that with a whole roster of duelists that you can have spooking around. You're going
to be insulting people all the time. So,
they don't take it kindly neither.
The odds of someone probably like the bookish wizard being challenged to a duel are pretty high.
Yep.
You may not want to use standard combat rules for that.
You may not, no. And the little abstract system is very easy. You can switch that up and say these aren't, rapier strikes. These are spell duels, and you can use the same system for that, and it'll work. So that's fun. There's a bunch of different suggested encounters. There's lists of NPCs and what they're looking for, what they want. And it's a great place for the DM to seed in all kinds of other stuff that they have going on in their campaign. You need to know this secret bit of esoteric lore from God knows how long ago. Well, there's this Shadow Fey wizard over here that, unbeknownst to the mortal world, has been doing that thing for centuries. So you can try to go talk to him. Yeah, so there's a lot of adventure potential, all just stirring around in this pot, and it's very much in the player's hands to decide how do we want to make ourselves important enough to get an invite to this to the actual court itself to get the notice of the queen, so we can try and convince her, hey, please don't crush our city.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff in this. From reading the ad copy and playing the adventure back in the day and stuff, like there's over 100 NPCs in this thing. There are a lot of encounters here that cover sort of all your pillars of play, and so there's a ton to mine. I think it's definitely something that you could take and pick apart if you wanted to. Do you guys agree?
In the like, I just want to take this section and have people sort of get a through line, a taste of it rather than the whole thing, that kind of way?
Yeah, as in, I need something, I want a cool encounter here. I can take one of these encounters and drop them in, or I need an interesting NPC here. I could pull one of these NPCs into my own.
For sure, yeah.
Absolutely, all of those NPCs are fun. Most of the encounters can be repurposed elsewhere. It could be the sort of thing where you visit the ambassador and meet some of these NPCs and you never actually get to the courts. It's kind of like, I don't know, like any other big social space like Waterdeep or Keep on the Borderlands, where there are NPCs who you might revisit repeatedly, or you might join one of the factions in the courts, or you might make friends with the bear folk and visit them time after time. So it can certainly become a whole framework, or you can cherry pick just the best NPCs out of it. I think it has high replay value because of those 100 NPCs, because every group you go with tends to gravitate to different factions or different styles. I mean, one may have a cool duelist character in it. Someone else may say, hey, our bard is our face guy, and the bard navigates the court.
Right. Sure.
And someone else may say, "Hey, we've got a barbarian. What are we gonna do?" He keeps sticking his face in the soup bowls, and he's making us look bad. So different stuff will stick out for different groups.
Yeah, and there's so much information in it. It's really a good chunk of gazetteer as well. So if you are not interested in the particular plot, you've got the entire courts of the Shadow Fey kind of outlined and in some places pretty well detailed for you to use as you see fit.
Oh yeah, and a fold-out map, like a gatefold map.
Yep.
So, which is pretty snazzy, and I think we're going to do a virtual tabletop version. Not on release day, but soon thereafter.
Having that information to draw from, for me, just from like having the older version of it, has been great. Like running the Midgard live stream, World Tree Burns. In our first season, we had a Shadow Fey player character, and so touching on some of the outer kind of satellite reach of the courts and her backstory, and then using that information to deal with the Shadow Fey ambassador at the embassy called Winter's Kiss in Zobek. So she got to meet and have some memory wine with Ambassador Thalamandrine. So that was quite awesome.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just something that comes from the courts, got written into canon for Zobek. And I believe the ambassador shows up in the Midgard World Book now, right? As just, he's a canonical character. You can visit him. Here's something about him.
Yep, he's also in the Zobek Gazetteer. Gets a little bit more information there.
Gazetteer, yes, with more detail.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I don't want to give away too many of his secrets, but he's a great character, right? And he goes back to the 4th edition days, and he's sort of one of those NPCs that I now think of as kind of defining Zobek and, the people you might run into or might go to for help, depending on who you are.
Yeah, and the Shadow Fey are they're just so full. They're elves and they're playable, but they're full of this dark fairy folklore magic. Like they trade in memories and emotions. So if you want something from them, you might have to give them a memory from your childhood where you were hurt or scared or sad or joyful, and you lose that memory forever. And they take it and they distill it into wine, and then they share it with their buddies and they drink it and they bask in the glow of you crying as a child because the kids in your village bullied you, right? And that just peps them up.
So
yeah, because that's the kind of jerks they are.
Yep. And so a lot of times their merchants don't even necessarily trade for coin; they trade for things like that. And you can get these wonderful shadow wrought gold things, and these, maybe even like a magic weapon or esoteric magic that deals with shadow and darkness and cold and illusion that nobody else can do. But these guys can just sort of yawn and cause these wondrous things to happen because they're so adept with this magic. And so you just have to trade away the memory of your first kiss, and they'll make you a powerful wizard. So that's cool, right?
Oh, wow.
It's a lot of fun. They're one of my favorite NPC races. Seeing them played as PCs always kind of makes me go, but that's not what we planned. And yet I totally get why. Well, I mean, the Drow are kind of similar, right? And Tieflings were originally bad guys only for Planescape. And this arc from really interesting villains to playable heroes is apparently an arc that happens pretty often in D&D, right?
Like one of the iconic books from my defining early 2nd edition campaigns was the Complete Book of Humanoids, or the Complete Humanoids Handbook. So, a crucial member of our party was a Kobold thief. And so
of course,
right.
Kobold thief,
you, man.
Every party should have one.
Lick was something else. You don't mess with him. and so people always have this like, oh man, I want to play a Minotaur. It's always there. In a couple of months ago in Unearthed Arcana, you saw centaurs and minotaurs being sort of teased out as playable races for official Dungeons and Dragons, and now they're in Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. They're all over the place. So Kobold Press has been no stranger to that. We've got our version of centaurs, minotaurs, kobolds, all kinds of Darrow. We've got playable Darrow, half.
Yeah, the playable Darrow is still one where I'm like, really? Every time I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I know a couple people who would really dig that.
Yep.
Not me, but people who
dust goblins. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, I'll play a dust goblin any day.
Yep.
I mean, those are all great things, and there's so much goodness certainly to be mined in the creatures of Kobold Press. And I wonder too about this, like, it sounds like part of the adventure is really about the arrogance of the Shadow Fey and how if they don't know who you are, they're not going to deal with you. And so a lot of it's like trying to get noticed, right? Trying to get the popular kids to invite you to come sit with them at lunch so you can ask them something is what this feels like is sort of boiled down into high school terms.
Yeah. No, there's clearly jocks, cool kids, and nerds. your classic flavors of high school translated into Elvish terms.
So, like, Midgard has the optional status system in the World Book, and we leverage that in the courts of the Shadow Fey. If you don't have the standing, they don't give a crap who you are. And so one of my favorite bits of this is this section of the campaign can actually really go on for in-game time. This can take months for you to just sort of live in and amongst the Shadow Fey, trying to become cool enough to get the ear of the queen, even for just a moment. And so this can become kind of a larger arc or section of a campaign that you're living in the shadow here in this place in the courts. That's a little bit of an oasis from the corruptive nature of the Shadow Realm, which will be nice for your humans and dwarves that are sneaking in here for the first time, because for mortals the shadow is very dangerous, but thankfully the courts are protected from some of that more insidious nature. You just have to deal with the Shadow Fey, which is a danger all its own. But yeah, so you can just kind of live and love, and there's courtly intrigue, there's romance, there's duels, there's assassination, all kinds of fun stuff.
Don't go anywhere. There's more tabletop babble coming up.
I'm Lisa Chen, and I host Behold Her, a monthly podcast that shines a spotlight on women in the world of tabletop games. There are so many women to behold in this amazing hobby, and our experiences as female gamers are as diverse as we are as individuals. Through one-on-one interviews, audio essays, and panel discussions, all centered around a monthly theme, the guests on Behold Her share their unique stories as players, game masters, designers, artists, organizers, and so much more. Their words are inspiring, uplifting, and informative. Check out Behold Her Podcast wherever podcasts are found, or visit beholdherpodcast.com.
All right, back to the show.
So there is tons of stuff going on in here. There's tons of stuff to mine. I am super duper duper excited to get my hands on the 5th edition version of this. What other new stuff is in there, right? Like, so obviously we've got these encounters, we've got these NPCs. Are there new monsters, new magic items, that kind of thing in here?
Yeah, there's some. I think Dan already hinted at some of the encounters on the Shadow Road are things not found elsewhere. So those kind of monsters are really one-offs. Unless you have the book, you're not going to see them. I think some of the memory magic is in there, and a couple other unique items.
So some of the memory stuff, I know that some of that made it into the World Book. I don't know that every version of it made it into the World Book. I think there might be a couple of new particular types of memories that you can distill into this magical effect. Because you can not only drink it as wine, you could also pop open a vial of righteous fury in the middle of combat and pour that out and get some benefits from that. And there's a bunch of different types of memories that have different effects that you can use.
Yeah, they're not all about bullying small children.
No, not at all. No, they can be about the strength of your first love. They could be about the accomplishment you felt when you finally opened your own guild hall.
Yeah, and those sorts of moments of triumph and success, of course, turn into, hey, bonus.
Yep, here's a little burst of something cool to help you out in this fight with that shadow creature that wants to eat your soul. There's some interesting NPCs. Like, I think you guys shared art of Revich the Blind Seer.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So that was stunning. This angelic figure with the blindfold, so there's this some sort of angel of light just hanging out in the middle of the courts of the Shadow Fey. What's his deal? There's I think he showed one of the Grey Sisters. This old wizened Shadow Fey lady knitting, sitting in a rocking chair knitting, draped in these long silks with some interesting spider motif on them.
It's sort of a grandma figure.
Yeah.
So warm and cuddly.
Yeah, she's probably got cookies.
Wow.
So those creatures, the gray ladies, the gray spinners have statistics in there. There are going to be some familiar faces from like the Tome of Beasts. There's mechanical interest on how to access and open shadow roads, which we've sort of talked about in like the World Book, but we've really never dug into. And in this, I believe, digs into it a little bit.
And for a long time, I really didn't want to put too much definition around it, because the thing about shadow is how mutable it is.
Right.
And pinning it down mechanically is like, the moment you do that, everyone says, well, this is the only way shadow works. I'm like, well, that's one way shadow works.
Yeah. And that's the idea. This is one way that you can open the titular shadow road that leads from Zobek toward the courts of the Shadow Fey. Right. And you have to figure it out. So you have to go around Zobek and find the people who know how to do it, because the Shadow Fey aren't telling. And so
why would they tell you?
Exactly.
You don't need to come visit them. You're only going to muck the place up.
Yeah. Don't call us. We'll call you.
Yeah. You stay here and make gold and silver for us.
And so you get to find interesting figures like the dragged woman who hang out around Zobek. And see what she knows about getting from place to place. Mm-hmm. Who is this this interesting, horrible, ghost-like, tragic figure from the revolt that overthrew the previous rulers 100 years ago.
And I read Naomi Novik's new novel, Spinning Silver, and the whole thing just felt like, wow, I should be ripping off big portions of this for the Shadow Realm. It has the same tone of, well, mortals are just trying to get by, and here's this whole other world of dark and malignant and winter fey. So if you haven't checked that out, I would also recommend that novel. So, I mean, I love Courts of the Shadow Fey because it hits the level point right where player characters are becoming super competent and it's hard to challenge them. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of changes up the rules a little. It says you're still hyper competent people, but you're now surrounded with an environment that doesn't just reward combat and perception, but also social grace, wit, and charisma, I guess. I think bards and paladins both do really well in courts for different reasons. They're often loudmouths, right? They're the ones who like to talk to everyone. And the bards, of course, well, they've got song and they've got charisma and they've got performance and they have a mean bit of patter and wit and trickery. And the Fae are like, oh, you're great. Let's put you in a little gilded cage over here. You're a charming little mortal bard.
Come and sing for us.
I mean, you're not as good as our bards, but look at you try. Oh, that's so great.
Oh, and you can charm people. How cute. Yeah.
Yes. Look at your charms. They're so primitive. Yeah. But really authentic and honest. Yeah. Well, we love that.
And paladins are always very forceful personalities, particularly in 5th edition with their emphasis on charisma. So that blends. That's a nice bridge between the mechanics and the play of them there. And so they tend to be party faces, just like the bards. They're forceful personalities, and that always is things are going to happen when you drop a forceful personality into a court.
Yeah, I mean,
a court setting.
Talking about, hey, it might be months of hanging around and living with the Fae. Probably not if you have a paladin in the party, right?
But see, that's one of the great things about 5th edition. It depends on the paladin.
Sure.
So depending on their oath and their flavor and what they're doing, that could be an eventful couple of months.
It could. Or they could just sort of show up and quickly make friends and enemies, which at the very least, like, they polarize everyone around them. Yep. And suddenly they're notable, right? They have enemies. Somebody hates their guts. The Demon Lord is not their friend. But part of Courts of the Shadow Fey is like stepping out of prior roles and making interesting enemies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing to point out. There's really, if you want to look at the scenario, there's no way to finger quotes win completely. You're gonna piss somebody off. You're gonna make enemies because there are factions and they're all at cross purposes. You help one, you're gonna piss off somebody else, and that's okay. That's fun.
But you can be judged by the quality of your enemies, right?
Absolutely.
Would be proud to have some of these enemies.
Yep. It's like, of course, I've stepped on the toes of the ancient necromancer who's enslaving souls out of that black river over there. Why wouldn't I make enemies with him? And here's the thing: your enemies in Courts of the Shadow Fey, they all have enemies. So when they see you screwing up their rivals, that's going to make them sit back and take notice, and they might send you a gift every now and then, and they might come over and chat you up at one of the cocktail hours in the court, and there's a banquet at some point, and so you're going to have to navigate your way through that. And making enemies gets you noticed. And one of the most egregious sin in the eyes of the Queen of Night and Magic is being boring. So as long as you're not boring, you're on the right path.
What gets rewarded in this adventure is being entertaining. And honestly, in any role-playing game, like, you can optimize for being dull and efficient. That strategy doesn't work here.
I do want to touch a little bit on Zobek because it plays such a big role in the adventure. Let's talk a little bit about Zobek. What is the city of Zobek?
Oh, well, it's where the Midgard setting got started, and at one time it was the entirety of the Midgard setting. Because we didn't want to define too much of the rest of the world at first. It's a trade town on a river. It's got an important road and an important river. So it's a crossroads town. It's mercantile. And its foundations are sort of a fusion of kobold culture, dwarven culture, and human culture. So hardworking, industrious folk. And the patron goddess is Rava, who is a sort of clockwork goddess of industry and thrift and mechanics and knowledge. She's like Athena gone steampunk.
Yeah.
And so the town ticks over, right? Like, the merchants have stuff to sell. They've got steam-powered servants. They've got an arcane collegium full of magic that's run a little bit like it's like Harry Potter. No, it's not Harry Potter. I don't know.
It's like half boarding school, half commune.
That's better.
Yeah, with a hefty dose of guild.
Yes, because like the Arcane Collegium and the city get along. Like, the town and gown split isn't as bad as you might think, because most of the heads of the various colleges, they are important mucky mucks in the city, and they want trade to thrive, and they want all their arcane scroll ingredients and so on to come through on the trade routes. So it's not a gigantic city, right? It's not like a Waterdeep. It's not 500,000 people or something. It's like 20,000. But it punches way above its weight population-wise because it has silver mines and it has all this trade. The other thing about it that I love to pieces that makes it distinct is it has a kobold ghetto. So the kobold population, and I mean, medieval towns had Jewish ghettos. This is somewhat like those. It's a very separate society, right? They're more nocturnal. They do their mining. They keep their own laws and rules. Nobody really wants to hang out with the kobolds, but everybody needs them. So there's that weird split, too. And the kobolds are really still kind of lawful evil. We do what we can to get ahead. Nobody appreciates us, so we're going to look after our own.
They do have a giant chip on their shoulder.
Oh, good Lord, it's huge.
And the fun thing about kobolds in Midgard is they're a little bit more industrious than kobolds as presented in, say, D&D's Monster Manual. They take a little bit more of that German folklore. So they're miners, they're tinkerers, they're alchemists. They cobble stuff together out of the trash that the rest of the city throws away. They are industrious little dudes.
I love Zobek a lot. I think it's a really great city that has a lot of potential in and of itself. So the fact that it gets transported to the realm of the Shadow Fey, I think, is huge.
Well, it doesn't get transported unless things go horribly wrong. So the claim of the Shadow Fey over the city is a legal claim to start with, and of course, the city can be pulled into Shadow, but Chapter 1 isn't. Oh, by the way, you're all in Shadow. It's more the opposite. It's hey, there's Shadow Fey all over the place.
Shadow is here. Yeah,
Shadow is here. But yeah, I think that sort of pulling into other plane stuff comes from Shadow and Midgard via Planescape, maybe? I mean,
probably a little bit.
Yeah.
He said, eyeballing Wolfgang Baur.
I don't know. It's like it shares similar designers who have similar concepts. Yeah, all right. I'll fess up. That's me.
And the fun part about the Shadow Fey's claim being a legal one to begin with is when you're dealing with Fey, legal takes on a whole new different dimension of binding. It's all about pacts and deals and bargains and promises made and broken, and how promises have weight. And when you're dealing with the Feywild and in this case the Shadow Realm, those promises get enforced just by the nature of the place, and so cutting deals can be dangerous.
Yeah, in the best way. So yeah, those are all good fun elements of Zobek that sort of play into the Shadow Fey. Obviously, the Dwarven connection is a whole antagonist part. They want nothing to do with the Shadow Fey.
Yep.
The human history in Zobek is very much one of, oh yeah, we swore fealty to the Shadow Fey. Then we had a revolt and killed all the people that swore fealty to the Shadow Fey. So we thought we were rid of them.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah.
Didn't we deal with this already?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's not how that works, turns out.
Well, that's not the way they see it working.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And humans are, dwarves want nothing to do with the Shadow. Humans are, following on that folklore thread, just so ready to do something to get ahead, right? So they are super susceptible to Shadow. And Zobek being such a cosmopolitan crossroads is one of my favorite parts of it. Is you can find pretty much any sort of character there. You can have someone from the Far East who came over on a flying citadel. You can have somebody from the Southlands who's trading spices to the north. You can have Northlands raiders that have come down here to find somebody who stole something from them. There's anything you can find in Zobek.
It's a really big, diverse place, one of those set-piece cities where you can start a campaign. So if you all are ready to talk about this, where can people find this product?
Well, the Courts of the Shadow Fey is available on the Kobold Press website as a pre-order, and then in March, we ship it everywhere. And better still, it's available also, not just in the regular edition, but there's a limited edition version of Courts of the Shadow Fey, which is done up kind of like the Wizards limited edition, sort of a leatherette cover, gold foil stamp. It's got ribbon bookmarks and different end papers, and it's just a really pretty edition of the adventure. So that's the first place I'd check, just because it's the Kobold Press store. You can also, of course, go down to your friendly local hobby shop. And I believe we'll have a PDF version online in the not too distant future, and a Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds version. So
nice.
all options.
All options available, which is great. Everybody should definitely check this out. It's an awesome adventure, and I am a huge, huge fan of Courts of the Shadow Fey. So where can people find you online, Dan?
Sure. Probably the most easy place to find me online is on Twitter. I'm at Dan_Dillon_1. I love talking about D&D in Midgard. I'm also running a Midgard live stream campaign Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, on the Encounter Roleplay Twitch network, twitch.tv/Encounter Roleplay.
Nice.
It's excellent.
Nice. And where can people find you, Wolfgang?
I also love Twitter to pieces. I am at Monkey King on Twitter. You can also find me answering questions in the Kobold Press and Midgard Facebook group.
Oh, yes.
Which is just a fan group that covers all sorts of questions. And, of course, koboldpress.com. You'll see me there once in a while. And I do not run a live stream. I should really... Yeah, I let Dan run the live stream. But those are the best places to find me most of the time.
Excellent. Well, it is great to have you both on. You're awesome, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to that awesome interview with Dan and Wolfgang. Go check out Courts of the Shadow Fey. It is a great adventure. You will not regret it, and you'll be able to mine it for so much goodness if you don't do a total playthrough of it. So much awesome in there. So, Tabletop Babble is still a new show, and you can help it grow. How? Head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. If you leave us a 5-star review, I'll read it out loud and credit you. You can make me say anything you want. Plus, more importantly, it helps the show get into the ears of new listeners. It's free to create an iTunes account, and even if you're not using iTunes to listen to podcasts, odds are your podcatcher uses iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to others. So go. Leave us a review and then leave all the others you love. And you'll get me to read it out loud if you leave a 5-star like Phil Olson from virtualpiazza.com. And from the UK leaves a review entitled Amazing Resource for D&D Enthusiasts. Phil says, really enjoying every episode of Tabletop Babble. Love the range of interviews, discussions, and advice. Well, Phil, thank you so much for this review. I really loved this. Thank you so much. People, I want to let you know that you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can check out my blog, worldbuilderblog.com, for all of the cool game design stuff I'm doing, plus a bunch of free resources, stuff like that. And hey, did you know that I wrote a level 1 through 20 adventure? It is called The Demon Plague. It's available at roleplayingtips.com/Demon Plague. Go check it out. It is for 5th edition D&D. And if you're still not sold, guess what? There's an actual play podcast where I run the game for a bunch of awesome players. Go check it out over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex.
Hey there, listeners. It's Shane.
And Ishan, your hosts from the Total Party Thrill podcast, the newest addition to the Don't Split the Podcast Network.
We talk topics that help you, dear listener, create and play better RPG games.
We have a back catalog of more than 150 weekly episodes.
And we got nominated for an Emmy for episode 11, Social Contracts.
In episode 154, we talked about crossing the moral event horizon. How evil is too evil?
We also recap our home games, like the 40k Rogue Trader campaign, Dynasty Unwarranted.
But that's mainly just you trying to kill us all. In your defense, our characters are greedy idiots.
Don't forget the 3 years we spent in Eberron playing Morning Glory, your 5th edition D&D campaign.
We also review new RPGs and books, and every episode we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
You might check out the Pint-Sized Punisher from episode 119, a halfling with a bad attitude, and 14 levels of Barbarian.
So to recap, Total Party Thrill, RPG advice, campaign recaps, and D&D characters built by your dashing hosts every single week.
What more could you possibly want?
To get back to the actual show?
Oh yeah, let me just hit this button, and here you go.